Okay, so we will continue where we were holding. Bein beheter, bein beisur chas v'shalom. For that matter, when we finished last time the class, I don't think perhaps it was appropriate to stop over here, but because it seemed perhaps that after davening, for those of you who are watching the class, it seemed like after davening the Beinani is able to arouse within his heart a taiva, a temptation and lust to any inyanim gashmim avelam hazeh, bein beheter bein beisur chas v'shalom. One might think that the Alter Rebbe is pointing out over here that as he demonstrates the enormous difference in the experience of the Beinani by davening opposed to the after davening, it could be indicative from the way we learned till now that after davening, additional to the taiva, chas v'shalom, he could fall through with that taiva, meaning that he could chas v'shalom transgress. And in other words, additional to having the taiva, lisavos taiva l'chol inyani gashmi selam hazeh bein beheter bein beisur. The Alter Rebbe even added that after davening, he could have a regular taiva to something which, according to Torah, is prohibited. So it seems perhaps to connote that after davening he would be able to not only have the taiva, but maybe even go on with that taiva. Shall we know? And we said this numerous times, and we say this time and again, because just to understand who we're dealing with a Beinani, meaning that we're dealing with somebody who somebody who never transgresses, for someone who gives in to a taiva, someone gives into a temptation, and someone gives into a lust, starting with isur, something which Torah prohibits. He's called a rasha. We're dealing with a Beinani which never ever sins. He's never called a rasha even one moment in his life. Al Rebbe is basically, and even heter, things which are permissible, things are permitted. It's not so simple, because to be overly indulgent in the permitted as well can be an isur based on what we learned in the previous chapters, and particularly, the difference between heter and isur. But in the end of the day, the heter, when it's something which is permissible and does not have a godly purpose, is also something which one should not go ahead with, again, as we elaborated in the previous chapters. But here, namely, what Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us, not chas v'shalom that the Beinani would go ahead with that taiva. He's telling us that somebody was just in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, someone was just praying, and the whole notion of prayers is that the Yid stands with a dveikus with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with a complete attachment and cleaves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we mentioned a few times, the whole experience of prayer is that a Yid gets close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on intimate levels. As we elaborated in this chapter, in the previous classes, the whole idea of tefillah. So what Alter Rebbe is saying is after that, so he's basically in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as we said, someone who loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot love something which is opposite than Elokus, opposite than God and godliness. Someone who's in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot experience any taiva to inyane isur, things which are antithetical to Elokus, and things even beheter, things which are not aligned with godliness. So the Alter Rebbe is mechadash over here. He's telling us that after davening, it is possible that this individual, which is just in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he's done with davening, by the Beinani, the taiva, the covet, the lust, the temptation could come to the surface as if he never davened. As the Alter Rebbe calls him, he never davened before. That he has a taiva to kol inyani gashmi selam hazeh, all physical matters, beheter, beisur, things which are permissible, and to the extent things are prohibited. But chas v'shalom, short of falling prey to those taivas, again, because he falls prey to the taivas, he's not called a Beinani, he's called a rasha. So what the chidush over here is that this experience of davening completely goes away when the Beinani is done with his davening. And the whole davening, basically, we learned in the previous classes, that this is really the experience of davening by the Beinani is a kind of a bonus. That in that time that he davens, because his heart, his inner koichas are transformed to Elokus, to godliness. Those times he is like a tzaddik. Again, we explained this in the previous classes. Why is there that similarity of the Beinani to the tzaddik in the time of davening? But we can understand, because the whole difference of the tzaddik and the Beinani, where is he careful more by his garments? In other words, he's careful in thought, speech, and action. That signal of the taiva, the signal of temptation, which the heart sends to the thought, speech, and action, to transgress chas v'shalom and ratzon Hashem, the Beinani is very careful not to allow that signal to come in. And on the leises and etzadah mitzvahs asay, in every opportunity to learn Torah, every opportunity to do a mitzvah, the Beinani will do that. Because the moment, again, the Beinani has a time that he can do a mitzvah or learn Torah, and he doesn't do that, even for a moment, he has the opportunity to learn Torah, and he doesn't learn Torah, he's called a Rosh. So we're dealing with someone who's a Beinani. When you're dealing with a Beinani, he's completely Shalem, he's complete with his machshava dibur u'maisa, which is thought, speech, and action. What is the difference of him and a tzaddik? A tzaddik has transformed the inner keiches, his cognitive faculties, his emotional faculties. They're kulil Hashem. So when the Beinani has the experiences of davening, that exercise of davening in the life of the Beinani, that's where he is similar to the experience of the tzaddik. But in essence, he's not a tzaddik, and he's far from a tzaddik. And the biggest proof is when he's done with davening, he's able, that whole excitement of Elokus, of God and godliness, is completely subsides, and he's able to arouse within his heart a klal, as we emphasized as well the last class. The klal, Alter Rebbe says that it's, on one hand, it's very discouraging, but in the same token, it helps us put things in perspective, that one does not fall in despair. When here he felt he was excited with God in the experience of davening, then he walks outside and he has this test and that nisayin, and that challenge and that obstacle, and he could think to himself, who's the real me? So in the end of the day, it's comforting, because the Alter Rebbe is really telling us that this is the new you. There's the you by davening, and there's the you after davening. So when it comes to the tzaddik is transformed his inner keiches, his nefesh itself, while the Beinani is only in the three garments. And the biggest, again, the Arieh, the hochacha, the proof to this is that after he's done with davening, the taiva to every beheter v'isur arouses again in his heart, and he has to control that taiva, that signal which comes from the heart, does not enter, not in action, not in speech, not even in thought. Ella. This is here where we're holding in the words El over here, L'shubedavar Isor, and something which is clearly prohibited. It doesn't dawn on him to chas v'shalom implement, to actualize this prohibition. Chas v'shalom. The only thing, the real struggle, that's something which never comes to mind. You're dealing with a frumiyid, and a frumiyid in the level of a Beinani. It never comes to mind, chas v'shalom, to do an avera. It knows the taiva he has, but to implement it, to allow that signal of the heart to cross the threshold into the garment of action, doesn't even come to his mind. Where does he have the main struggle? As we can understand and relate to this here, Huri Aveira, Koshim Aveira. When it comes to something with so more delicate like thought, this is where the challenge of this is the real challenge of the Beinani. Because to do an Aveira, Chas v'Shalom, we would never do. We would never even think of doing an Aveira. The taiva he could have, but to do an Aveira, it never dawns on him to actually go ahead and implement this taiva, to come through, to follow that taiva. When it comes to speech, it could be a little more difficult, but he could still forcefully close his mouth. He has an opportunity, a juicy opportunity to speak Lashon Hara. He has something nice to say, and he can get his attention, or some Lashon Hara to say, and you get the attention of quite a few people. In other words, like any other taiva, there's a good opportune moment to implement the Chaninah the Aveira of Dibur, Lashon, this classic transgression of Dibur would be Lashon Hara, but he would hold himself back, and if he needs to bite his tongue, he'll bite his tongue. That's much of a less of a challenge for the Beinani. The real challenge of the Beinani when it comes to thought, because thought is something which is so much harder to control, because Lashon is machshava mishetetes tamid. There's nothing you can push a button and say stop the thought. Thought is something which constantly flows. The only thing is where you're going to channel the thoughts. There's going to be thoughts which are Inyan Kedusha, things which are holy, sacred, or even things which are neutral, but chas v'shalom, not to impure one's neshama with impure thoughts. So there is a challenge again, because the machshava is mishetetes tamid, and the question is, where am I going to channel my thoughts? There's where the main struggle the main experience of struggle in the life of the Beinoni. The main struggle the Beinoni has to deal with. And the expression of Hiruri Aveda Koshim Aveda is really a Gemara, which the Alter Rebbe is really speaking about Hiruri Aveda, but as he speaks about the words, he says Hiruri Aveda, he tells us about the main struggle of the Beinoni, that it's all about Machshava, or namely Machshava. He quotes this Gemara which tells us Hiruri Aveda Koshim Aveda, because one might think, there's no question that Torah tells us certain things we're not allowed to think about. In other words, certain things we're not allowed entertaining our minds in a way that would impurify our neshama. I know that, and I know this is the same Eibishter who tells us we're not supposed to do certain things, and the Eibishter that tells us not to speak certain things, it tells us we're not allowed entertaining our mind with certain things. Fine. But in the same token, one could always feel a certain leniency, because in the end of the day, I'm not doing anything, and I'm not saying anything, I'm not harming anybody. There's certain thoughts which come up to my mind, and I allow it to go through. So the Alter Rebbe says, firstly, it's an Aveda. And when Chas v'Shalom and a Beinoni will allow those thoughts to willingly and deliberately allow those thoughts to enter into his conscious mind, and his continued thinking something, even though he notices that it's something which Torah says it's prohibited, it's a clear Aveda. It's a clear transgression, and they were dealing with a Beinoni, that a Beinoni is never a Rasha even one moment. Alter Rebbe says, all additional, one has to know that from a certain perspective and point of view, the impure thoughts impurify the neshama in a sense even more than actual avedis. So in the world of Asiya, Dibur, Machshava, Asiya seems to be the worst than everything, worse than any other Avedas, simply because we live in an Olam HaMaisa, and the significant majority of Avedas are dealing with Maisa action, as opposed to the amount of Avedas we're dealing with thoughts are much less and much fewer than speech and action, and particularly in comparison to action, because again we're living in a world of Maisa, and therefore, namely, the significant majority of transgressions and the mitzvahs leisas are in the world of Maisa. But in the same token, one has to know that when you're dealing with the impurity of the neshama, and from a certain perspective and point of view, machshava, thought, impurifies the neshama even more than ma'aseh. Because in the end of the day, the machshava, the reason why it's so delicate is because it's so much closer to the core of the nefesh. That is the reason why you see certain similarities between the machshava, thoughts, and the nefesh. The fact that in the detail which we mentioned before, that it's meshitetes tamid, it's not something which comes to a stop and a start. It's always flowing similar to the existence of the nefesh. There's never a stop to the nefesh. Dibur, which is more distant from the nefesh, it's a step lower, so it doesn't have that nitzchius, it doesn't have that constant flow like the nefesh isn't going to exist on a constant basis, and therefore there's an eisla daber eis lachshus. There's a time when a person speaks and at the time when a person is silent. Similarly, when it comes to action, there's a first time when the person could sit with his hands folded, and the time when the person goes ahead and does something, and the time when the person rests. And the reason is because it's even more distant than from the core of the nefesh. When it comes to machshava, the whole reason we find the similarities between the machshava and the nefesh, additionally we see a certain koyach, a potency in machshava or dibur, for example. A person could think in a few seconds, which it could take him a long time, in no comparison in the time a person has to express himself within speech, as much he has to take that same idea, that same developed idea, how long it took him to think about it. It could be literally a minute, a person 60 seconds, it could take him 2 hours to talk, and this which he thought in 60 seconds. Why so? Because the machshava is so much closer to the nefesh, so it has certain ideas which are very similar to the nefesh. That idea of the nitzlis, that eternity, or more so that koyach, that energy which the nefesh have, you find in machshava as well. And other similarities, we all know the koyach of machshava is so much different than dibur and ma'aseh. Hence, when a person chas v'shalom is maharer huri aveda, things which are inappropriate. So in comparison to the bigger pictures we live in Elam HaMaisa, there's no question, and the significance we mentioned before, the significant avedas and leisas is dealing significant amount of leisas are dealing with maisa, and even so many more than machshava is also dibur. because again we're living in Elam HaMaaseh. But if you're dealing of the impurification of the neshama, machshava from a certain perspective and point of view impurifies the neshama even more than Maaseh. And again, for this very reason, the machshava is closer to the nefesh, is more attached to the nefesh. So chas v'sholom, if a person allows himself to think things which Torah says, do not think, and he deliberately allows himself, and even knowing, he realizes in an impure machshava, and he continues to think that machshava, he's impurifying his neshama even more than if he would do the Aveda itself. That is the inner meaning of Irhuri Aveda Kosher Aveda. So again, this you can say is Al Tereba brings this Gemara just to demonstrate the severity of Chas v'Shalom transgressing even in here, even in machshava. But getting back to the struggle of the Beinani, Irhuri Aveda, there's where the Beinani has the greater struggle. It could accomplish, it could ascend, and it could have an impact on him rather. To ascend to his mind, and to disturb him. If he's learning Torah in his davening, as we all know, sometimes we start learning Torah, this comes to mind and that comes to mind. And particularly when a person starts davening, and Dr. Rabbi later is going to say in the chapter 28, sometimes precisely when a person davens, that's when it's not a contradiction to what we had at the beginning of the Pedic, that a person davens is completely in love, completely connected with the Dveikus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But till he gets there, there's many times we have, precisely when we start davening, we have this challenge between one thought, the thoughts of davening, to other thoughts which precisely come into our mind when we start davening. So this is disturbs these hirhurim, and even not in time. The Rebbe speaks about Torah v'Aveda, and generally the person's struggle to maintain a pure and clean garments is more reflected in the garment of machshava. So this is where Yechel and Lifel can have an impact in him, to ascend to his mind, and to disturb him from his learning, disturb him from his davening. But as I'll tell us, there's 3 Avedas where man is not totally spared from these 3 Avedas on a daily basis. And when Al Rebbe says Ein Adam Nitzel Behen, it's not that, it doesn't mean that Chas v'Shalom he deliberately must transgress these 3 Avedas. Ein Adam Nitzel Behen means to say that he's on the verge, he has to make enormous, intense decision on such a frequent basis in order that these Avedas should never be implemented. This is the Pirush Edem Nitzel Mehen, because again, as we mentioned before, the person B'Payil is over, in actuality is over on these 3 Avedas, which Al Rebbe quotes over here 2 of the 3 Avedas, because they're both aligned one with each other, which is the Hirur Aveda and Hirur Aveda and Iyun Tefillah, which is the Hirur Aveda, which as we dealt with before, also the Iyun Tefillah. Every word of davening should be focused on. In other words, the entire Pirush Hamilos, or any Pirush, or any kavanah which a person has in his davening, to maintain that kavanah throughout the entire davening is an enormous challenge for the average yid, even for the Beinani. Even somebody who's so careful and maintains on a constant basis a holy thought, speech, and action, or a thought, speech, and action which is aligned with Ratzon Hashem, he also, the Gemara says, Adam, he is that Adam, even is a special Adam, he has that great challenge, Ein Nitzel Mehen, these, which is again B'chol Yom, every single day, and not only every single day, as we know it, the challenge could come up many times in one day, and then back to the Iyun Tefillah, every time we start davening to maintain that kavanah from the beginning of davening till the end, is an enormous challenge. So, but to clarify that when we say Einam Nitzel Mehen B'chol Yom Hirhuri Aveda, doesn't mean Chas v'Shalom that every day the Beinani allows himself to think Hirhuri Aveda. If someone thinks Hirhuri Aveda deliberately, he's not a Beinani anymore. He's Rahman and Slan, he's a Rasha. So therefore, the Nitzel Mehen means over here in this case, he's not something he could just close the door and says, I am Nitzel, I am saved, I am spared, like somebody has the kayach not to speak in Yonah Lashon Hara. He closes his mouth, he's Nitzel. He's completely saved. It's not a problem. He's going to make sure never to transgress. He's going to have to fight with his hands. Even something he has a temptation, he will never go ahead and do it. So that's called Nitzel. The door is closed. He's able to close the door and says, not coming in. His Avedis is never, in no form or fashion would he could we have to say by the other Avedis that he is He closes the door. If he has to close his mouth, and if he has to do it with greater force and intensity, he will do so. So therefore he has that feeling of security, of atzala, of salvation from these avedas. When it comes to Huri Aveda, the Gemara says not nitzil mehen. In this case, means to say that he's always challenged from these avedas. That's pshat nitzil mehen. Because again, as we will see, and we mentioned again quite a few times, the moment he deliberately accepted, and he says, the Gemara says, enam nitzil mehen. No, he's no more a beinani. In this case, nitzil mehen means that he cannot just lock the door and say, no, they're not coming in, because machshava meshetetes tamid, and therefore he has this challenge on an ongoing basis, which is again the Hirei Aveda and the Iyun Tefillah. So how does he maintain? In other words, because he's a Beinani, and a Beinani doesn't transgress even the machshavta, even in thought. So he says, how is he truly able to spare himself from this challenge? For this, it helps, what has an effect and an impact, is that mark in his mind. Interestingly, is explained in a number of other places in Chassidus, that after the Beinani experiences that bonus of prayer, bonus of davening, which again, then he's very similar to the tzaddik. After davening, after that experience, a mark remains in his mayach, a mark remains in his mind. It's like you take a pencil and you write a piece of something on a piece of paper and you erase it. It's not erased completely. A mark remains, and in this case, there's a very positive mark which remains from the experience of davening. A very positive mark remains from the experience of davening. Not that again, as the Alter Rebbe describes it, not that he was able to shun any taiva. The Fedish not. Hispalel clouds that he didn't daven at all. That Ava which he had to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is gone. The Yireh of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is gone. That is limit to the time of prayer. But even after it's gone, and Dr. Rebbe testifies, Hispalel clouds, something like the page is erased, yet the mark remains, and that mark gives him the koyach, the ezer, that koyach which he needs in order to overcome this challenge. Generally, the challenge of Machshavah Dibur U'Maaseh, but namely this challenge Dr. Rebbe deals with Hirei Aveda. So interestingly, Dr. Rebbe doesn't, in other places, it says clearly it's the Rishimu which comes from the davening. Here, Dr. Rebbe doesn't say it so clear that it's the Rishimu which comes from the davening. Here he said, Dr. Rebbe says, Rishimu b'meichin v'yiras Hashem v'havasei m'suseres b'chol ha'yamani. He says, Rishimu b'meichin, you could say Dr. Rebbe is alluding to davening. Because how does the Beinani, even when Dr. Rebbe dealt with the Beinani's davening, he says it always begins with a Chabad, it always begins with his intellectual faculties, his cognitive faculties perceiving with a comprehensive perception on the reality of Elokus. That is the initial step in the person's connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you remember, we spoke about this in the previous weeks, the famous vart that how does a person able to v'haftas Hashem Elokecha begins with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That hero Israel in this case is not only hearing, listening, it means pondering and then profoundly understanding the Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And this is what the Yid is the commanded. The real tzivui begins with Shema Yisrael. That he perceives this notion of Achdus Hashem in the most authentic manner possible, in the most genuine manner possible, with his mayach, with his chokhmah, his bina, and his das, with his wisdom, his intellect, and intelligence and understanding. He profoundly ponders in this reality of Elokus, that Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Consequently, and more so inevitably, it would lead to v'haftas Hashem Elokecha, that his midas, his feelings will be driven in the direction of Elokus. As we mentioned again, we spoke about why everything has to start with Chokhmah Bina Das, because ultimately what produces a midah, what produces a feeling, is when you understand something thoroughly. So this is probably when the Alter Rebbe says Harshimu b'meichin, in the mind, because the whole experience of davening begins with the person's hisbeinenus, the person's understanding of the reality of Elokus. So when he finishes the experience, the heart experience, which the Beit experience by davening, is gone, but that is Shima b'meichin, that affirmative understanding or knowledge, even if behind the mind, it's not in an expression of, that's not in a state of expression, it's not in a state of manifestation. Quite on the contrary, the experience of davening is over, but the reshima, that mark, b'meichin, that steadfast mark which exists in his mind of the reality of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, gives him the koyach, gives him the energy that he's able to withstand any taiva, even the most struggling taiva, the taiva which brings about the greatest struggle, which is the taiva in Hirah and the taiva of Machshavte, in the challenge of thought. So this is the Rishimu b'meichin, and the Yiras Hashem ba'abasi ha'mesuteres b'chol ha'yimani, as the Alter Rebbe later is going to explain, starting from the 18th chapter, that every single Yid innately has an Avos Hashem, innately has Yiras Hashem. As we know, there's different types of Avos Hashem and different types of Yiras Hashem. There's Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, which we spoke about with the BAYT experiences by davening, which again is aroused and is produced by meichin, a comprehensive understanding of the reality of God, produces a feeling to the reality of God. To HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it produces a feeling of love, and it produces a feeling of awe. A true, tangible feeling is aroused when a person understands the b'meichin, with his chokhmah bina das, of the emes of Achdus Hashem, of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But the later in Perek Yud Ches, the Alter Rebbe says even the Yiras Hashem additional of the Yiras Hashem and the Avos Hashem, which are produced through a comprehensive understanding of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every Yid has an innate Avos Hashem, because he's a bench of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As a Yid, he has an Neshama, and Neshama is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As a child, even he would be, even not necessarily a child as to ponder in the greatness of his parents, for him to have a feeling towards his parents. Sometimes he does. And therefore, sometimes the mother of a child, son to a father, a child to a father, is in a way that you feel it's a total emotional experience. And similar when it comes to Yira. But even a child which does not experience that on the surface, or he's not completely overtaken by the emotion of Ava and Yira to his parents, there's always the fact that he's a ben, he's a son of this parent, and a son of that parent, a son of his father, and a son of his mother, or he or she are the child of this father, this mother. That itself, there exists, and that itself tells us that deep down there is an inclination of this child precisely to his parents, which he doesn't have to anybody else in the world. It's because he stems from his parents, and because he stems from his parents, even though he's not overtaken by the emotional ava, sometimes he is, but we're dealing with times he doesn't, it inevitably exists, even if it's not on the surface, like the Alter Rebbe uses lashon hamesuteres, it's hidden, but it's very deep, it's very profound, and namely it's inherent because he stems from this father and this mother. Similarly, every single Yid, because he has a chelik l'kami mal mamash, he has a part of Hashem within him, which is his neshama. So because of that, he has an innate avat HaKadosh Baruch Hu and an innate yirat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So additional to the reshima b'meichin, that mark which comes subsequent to davening, or as a result of that experience, a davening experience. And again, we're just going to point this out, the meichin, not necessarily in his heart, because that whole heart experience which experienced by davening is gone. But the meichin, that establishment, that affirmative establishment of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that's one thing. And then he says the Yiras Hashem Abasi HaMesuteres, which is hidden b'chol ha'yimani. Again, hidden in this context means it's inherent, it's not on the surface, but it so profoundly exists deep down within every single Yid. The Chol HaYimani on the right side of his heart, as we mentioned a number of times, this is where the Elish Nefesh Elokis is stationed. This gives him the koyach, the energy, to strengthen himself and to be dominant on this evil, which it arouses with this temptation, that it would not be able to cross the threshold of heart, not only to action but in speech, but in this case in thought, that it would not have any dominance of a rulership in the city. As we remember, quite a few times we spoke about this, which the Alter Rebbe mentions it clearly in, I believe, chapter 8 or 9 rather, where the Alter Rebbe uses the lashon of ear, that the person's body is like a city. Each one wants to capture the entire city. Each one of these two malachim, the two kings, want to capture the entire city. Which we're dealing with malachim, these monarchs. In this case, is the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. But in the life of the Beinoni, because of this determination which he has never to transgress the Ratzon Hashem, he makes sure that signal, that taiva, that temptation which arouses within the experience of the Beinoni post tefillah, after davening, should not have any rulership and should not have any dominance be'ir in the city, to come from a state of potentiality into action, which means it would not, that signal which comes from the heart will not cross that threshold, to invest in the limbs of the body. Even in his mind, to think willingly something which Torah says is prohibited. The Beinoni in the Nefesh Bahamis in the Shlita Mimshala does not have any dominance and does not have any rulership. To think deliberately and willingly, meaning that he would accept this thought hara, which is evil, which comes on its own from the heart to the mind to think about it. Right when it comes to the machshava. In other words, it sends the signal, the heart sends a signal, think about that. That's going to entertain your mind. You'll feel good about it, but that's an animalistic good, an animalistic entertainment. But the life of the Beinoni, he makes sure miyad baliyas l'sham, right when it comes to his thought. And he notices this is something which Torah says, Torah dictates and says, no, you are not allowed to think these thoughts. What he does is he pushes away with both hands, and he turns his mind right away, and he turns his mind from this thought. And interesting, we mentioned this as well in the previous classes, the beautiful expression of Dr. Rebbe, and the message over here of Decheyu b'shtei yadayim, pushes away with two hands, because many times in the life, especially with the Frumiyid, that he knows that something is inappropriate, so he tries to push it away, but he has the two hands. One hand is saying come in, and the other hand is saying I'm a Frumiyid, I'm not allowed to think this, and I'll push it away. The Alter Rebbe uses the lashon Decheyu b'shtei yadayim. No, this is not coming in no form or fashion. With both hands he pushes it away. And Mesiach Daita, he makes sure that his mind will completely remove itself from that whole thought miyad shenizka shehirura, right away when he reminds himself this is something which Torah describes this as a inappropriate thought. And the moment he realizes that this is where it's going, he pushes it away with two hands, and he doesn't accept this chas v'shalom willingly. You have even to think about this willingly, and much more so in the experience of the avodah of the Beinoni, chas v'shalom, not only certainly not to think, or rather not to think, and how much more so certainly not to implement this thought, chas v'shalom, even to speak about it. Because when you think about something, Torah says not to think about willingly, deliberately, you're called a Rasha in that moment. And the Beinoni and a Rasha feels shachas la'elam. The Beinoni is not a Rasha even one moment. As we said in the beginning of this chapter, he is never a Rasha even one moment in his life. Have a great night. We'll look forward the next time around.